Welcome to another session of Research Talks. SCRMCI, as we fondly call it, or Symbiosis Center for Research in Media and Creative Industries, has been functioning for the past 3 years. And we have consistently been doing a lot of work. Research around consumer behavior, research around creative industries, research around film studies and media studies, and whatnot. Today, we are going to have yet another talk. And this time, it's very special for me because it's none other than Dr. Anuja Pradhan, who's also a colleague of ours, who's a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine. And I would like to begin by telling everyone the story of how you reached SCRMCI or SIMC. Anuja Pradhan came to us for the first time as one of the speakers for a session called Viewpoints. And she was then working at the University of Southern Denmark as an assistant professor. And she came to us and she spoke to us about coffee cultures and consumption. And we were all enthralled. And that's when we decided that, we should have her here. And she's now with us, teaching our students, and very much a very integral part of SCRMCI.
Thank you so much, Swapna.
Yes.
Thank you for that introduction. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So Anuja completed her PhD from the University of Lancaster, and she works around the idea of consumption cultures, media studies. She does a lot of interesting work, which I'm not going to talk to you right now, but I would like the whole idea to slowly unravel through your words. Interestingly, she has done 2 series of podcasts, which I will be talking about later. So let's begin.
Absolutely.
Good to go?
Thank you for that generous introduction.
So let's hear a little bit about your journey.
I think my journey towards research or towards where I am today really started with my master's, but maybe even before that, during my bachelor's is when I became interested in marketing as a subject. The marketing professor is usually the coolest one, I feel, when you're doing a sort of management degree, because they get to teach you about advertising and storytelling and all of these fun things. So I then went to the University of St. Andrews to do my master's in marketing. And that's where I really became interested in this idea of understanding the relationship between marketing and society, right? So I had 3 professors who introduced me to this idea. That's Julie Brooks, Tim Scott, and John Desmond. And they opened up my mind to a different viewpoint on marketing, which is not necessarily one that requires me to understand managerial implications, but instead societal implications, right? And that was really interesting. Then I went to Lancaster University in the UK, where I was introduced to a field called consumer culture theory research, which is where I'm located now, I would say, in terms of my academic work. And my supervisors, Professor Dr. Emerita, now Margaret Hogg, and Dr. Haley Cocker, brought me into the world of consumer culture theory. I was really inspired by their research, and particularly a lot of Margaret's research, because she looks at a lot of mother-daughter stories, particularly in consumption contexts, right? I found that to be a very fascinating space. And then moving forward, I think I have continued to work in this realm of sort of feminist studies, consumption research, and then also media studies because of my general interest in media.
Very interesting. I have been reading some of your work as well, and something that really caught my attention, for example, was gender and consumption cultures. And I do have to say that I appreciate the way you bring in a critical lens to management studies, which I always see kind of missing in a lot of management scholars and, their works, especially in the context of India. So it's usually case studies and things like that. But then you bring something new into it, that critical lens that I always look forward to seeing in a research work. So how is your work in the context of gender and consumption cultures?
Thank you for that question. So I think I was introduced, like I said, to this critical view of marketing and consumption through the notion of consumer culture theory, right? So consumer culture theory research essentially tries to interrogate consumption cultures as a central organizing force of society. Right. So we believe that rather than even seeing ourselves sometimes as citizens first, we see ourselves as consumers first in contemporary society. So it's important as academics for us to interrogate the related identity projects, consumption practices, and so on. And what I found fascinating was that consumer culture theory does a lot of borrowing, right? Sometimes we're critiqued for that, being the parasites almost of this kind of study, but we borrow from sociology, from anthropology, cultural studies, media studies, and so forth, to try to interrogate, again, this relationship between consumption practices, marketplace forces, and socio-cultural contexts. Right? So the idea is to try and build a non-universal understanding of consumer cultures, right? So why I consume something here in India today at this point, or you and I do it, is very different to perhaps in another context, right? Traditional management marketing has not really been open to that idea. It's been a lot of universal claims. So seeing this idea of paying attention to socio-history, right? Like how have the people of a certain place been shaped and conditioned by historical settings, right? What are the contemporary settings that influence their consumer behaviors? And also, how does their consumer behavior then have an impact on contemporary society? Right? So all of these things I found was very interesting. The other thing that this field taught me is that you're an academic, right? So you do not need to have managerial implications, which we'll talk about this later, makes it sometimes difficult to publish, I think, right? But they introduced this idea of a critical view towards our consumer society. Yes, there is a lot of potential as well. I think if you understand consumption practices, you can also do a lot of research and see how, you can use marketing for the good almost, right? But that being said, I think it's also important to understand that maybe it's not so great all the time, right? So a more nuanced understanding.
I like the way you said marketing for the good.
Yes.
Right? Quite a contradiction, I guess. So when you look at, you mentioned how you go for an interdisciplinary approach when it comes to looking at consumption cultures and so on. So what are your favorite theoretical frameworks in this context?
Thank you for that great question. So I think two fields that I like to borrow from heavily are, one is sociology and the other is feminist studies, which was actually the question you started me with. But I would say still learning and quite new to feminist studies. I guess we're all learning all the time. But I think for me, understanding gendered experiences of the marketplace brings me a lot of joy to tell those stories and to try to understand the different intersections also at which we experience society and the marketplace, right? So one is taking a gender lens, and then the other is usually taking a social class perspective. So your traditional Bourdieu studies. These are probably the two areas that I find really interesting.
So since you are from the global south and you were working in the global north and you were working on gender especially. So was it challenging, or did you feel that it was kind of helping you shape your work in a certain way?
Yeah, I think it's always challenging to work on gender research, no matter where, right? But I felt that I always wanted to do research that was interesting to me and that spoke to me, right? And I accept that I had the privilege to do that as well, right? Not everybody has that privilege, I think. But I've also had to, obviously, then you have to also make sacrifices in order to do that research. You know that there are certain journals, let's just say, that are open or more open to gender research than others, right? There are certain journals that are more open to feminist perspectives when it comes to marketing than others, right? But this was a very important agenda for me to follow. I came to feminism rather late. I think that, like a lot of millennial women, we've been taught that feminism is a dirty word. And I think a lot of Gen Z women and the next generation is also unfortunately being told the same. I believe that's because of, firstly, a misunderstanding of what feminism is as a political project, right? It's just a fight for human rights and equality. Really, equality for all genders, correct? That's what we're looking for, really. But it gets this, it has this negative connotation almost. But I came across feminism finally, and I learned from a lot of women in my field that they're able to successfully do such research, right? So why not me as well? I remember I was at the University of Southern Denmark as a part of my PhD work. I'd gone there as a visiting PhD scholar. And then I'd also done this summer course there where one of my mentors now, Pauline McLaren, was teaching us Judith Butler. Right? Okay. Yes. And she was so fantastic. And I think she was so proud of being a gender scholar in this space. Even my supervisors, right? Like even Margaret has such fantastic work in that space that I thought that it really called to me, and I worked from there. And one of the earliest projects where I worked primarily through this lens was a project that I did with my co-author Carly Drake, and it's called Netflix and Cringe. Right? So there we were trying to interrogate this idea of why people around the world were watching the Netflix show Indian Matchmaking, right? And cringing, right? Everybody was embarrassed, but everybody continued to watch it. So we were very interested in understanding why that was happening, right? And what we propose in that paper is that cringe is something more than just embarrassment. Instead, it's a bundle of ugly feelings that we often find difficult to acknowledge, correct? But if you put in a little bit of introspection, right, you will see that there are like hidden and surprising affective states there, including empathy, social comparison, and so on. So when you and I, Swapna, talk about a TV show, oftentimes, you'll find these cringy characters there, right? But the more you discuss, you realize, well, maybe there was a part of me that was also similarly cringe. Correct? That's what we found. And I think that a feminist lens helped us do that, right? Helped us understand that there are so many biases and prejudices that we have that we need to interrogate.
Very interesting. I was thinking of, the idea of feminism in contemporary times, especially when, post-feminism and even people call it anti-feminism happening, thriving in social spaces. And then you're working on something like management studies, which is so in the mainstream and, it's part of commodification and everything. So how do you negotiate through that? I'm really very curious to know how do you find your kind of feminism or the feminism that you just mentioned about. How do you find that space for yourself?
I think it's difficult, firstly, but through a lot of introspection, reflection, reading, and continuously trying to understand yourself as well as the world around you, through a little bit of empathy and care firstly, but also empathy and care without losing that critical lens.
That's very important, I think. Coming to your other works, something that really caught my attention was the very catchy titles that you have.
Thank you.
Romanticy and then, Celebrity Thirst Trap. Wow, amazing titles. How do you come up with them?
Yeah, I think I am part of a generation that's always online. So we speak through memes and memes and jokes, and that's why these titles are always top of mind, I would say.
Congratulations on being selected as the editorial board member of a very prestigious journal, Marketing.
Thank you so much.
Marketing Theory?
Yes.
Yes. So being part of a journal, such an important journal, do you go with the titles that you see? Do you feel like, okay, this may be a good paper?
So
do you get impressed like that?
I must say I do sometimes judge a book by its cover and get impressed by a catchy title. But you do have to read the rest of it, of course. Thank you. I think being part of the editorial board of the Marketing Theory is something that I really value. I think I came into this space because of a special issue that I'm editing with a few of my co-authors, and it's on alternative methods of qualitative inquiry to advance marketing and consumer research.
All the best on that.
Thank you so much. We're almost at the final stages now. The last few manuscripts are coming through and the special issue will be out soon. Again, it came from that idea, that feminist political idea of trying to interrogate even qualitative research, right? Because there is a tendency within qualitative research to stick to interviews and observations, which are fantastic methods, right? But we wanted to see what happens when you go beyond, because consumer culture theory kind of came up as resistance to a lot of mainstream marketing perspectives, right? And then now when qualitative research is being adopted more widely, we thought, okay, great. So how can we do even better? Because there are so many things that you can't capture through an interview, right? There are experiences, consumer experiences that you can't capture simply through observation. So we've been interested in trying to understand what are the other ways that we can do this. And some of my co-authors and I have been working in the space of autoethnography, collaborative autoethnography. And then one of my co-authors, Scott Jones, along with his former supervisors, Maria Piacentini and James Cronin, has worked on videography. Scott and I have also written research short fiction stories as well, right? So we love these alternative forms of expression, which I think help you, one, understand the consumer experience in different ways. And secondly, I love projects like research fiction because it makes research more accessible to a wider audience. And I think that's very important, right? To make research accessible, to make knowledge accessible to a wider audience, which was the idea behind the podcasts that I did as well. The idea of trying to get out of the gatekeeping that the publishers tend to do and try to spread knowledge, really.
Actually, I think what you just said about, all these alternative methodologies that you're looking at and, trying to give a little more popularity to, I feel like they also will help in a way, sort of get over the whole AI slop kind of things that researchers right now are like struggling to deal with. And the kind of research papers that you get to review, I mean, like it's absolutely shocking to see how people can submit such things. So I think these methodologies are a way to sort of get over those kind of, constant temptations.
Yeah, thank you so much. I agree with you. I think so as well. New ways of sort of developing knowledge, but also setting ourselves apart from the machines in a way, right? Yeah, there has to be something that we can do that maybe the machines cannot.
You also mentioned the podcast. One of the podcasts that I came across was Tales of Consumption. Would you like to tell us something about that?
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So Tales of Consumption is a podcast that I did when I was at the University of Southern Denmark with my co-host Alev Kuruoglu and our producer Carsten Prince. So we were funded by a special project within the university for that podcast. The idea was again to try to make these sort of interrogations into our consumer society more accessible to students as well as other researchers, right? So every week we would choose a topic on which we would discuss. So obviously our first podcast was on coffee. First episode had to be on coffee. But then we had other themes. We talked about sports, sustainability, NFTs, and so on and so forth. Available on all podcast spaces, even now, by the way. Yes, if you would like to check it out. But yeah, the idea was to try to make something that would be accessible and fun, which I think has been a very important part of my career and continues to be. So we wanted to make it fun. So we would have a different speaker every time. What we tried to do at least was most times have either one speaker and one student or two students, right? So our bachelor students or our master students would do these fantastic theses and we would bring them on and they could tell us about their thesis, right? That would also get, I think, more students interested in academics from a research perspective. So I really enjoyed working on that podcast with my co-creators who were fantastic.
Very collaboratory. Absolutely. Yeah. But I also noticed that a lot of your work has been with collaborators.
Yes, absolutely. The joy that I get from collaboration is fantastic. I think working on your own is also has its benefits, of course, but I always think that you can build together, and that's something that my co-author Kali and I particularly experienced when we were writing our paper on feminist collaborative autoethnography, right? So for our first project together on cringe watching, we did a collaborative autoethnography where we wrote diaries about our personal experiences with the media artifact, and then we commented on each other's diaries, right? And when you're doing it, you don't realize what a vulnerable experience that is because you're really letting somebody in to your inner mind, right? So that's me, Swapna, going home today, writing about my day and then showing it to you. That's
a lot of trust involved in
absolutely,
that.
Absolutely, right? And as much as there is trust, there is also a sense of shared something, right? Like being seen. Because so many times in our margins, we would say, oh, I felt the same way. Or sometimes when you read something really vulnerable, you also try to make your co-author feel less vulnerable, right? Try to reassure them. So yes, it opens you up, but you also build trust. And I think you get better data that way, maybe not better, but more reflexive data in that sense, right? So that was a great process for us. But what we realized, there were so many times during the process where we just had to step away sometimes. You would not think, right? Watching a show like Indian Matchmaking, what's going to happen? But then our diaries were all about our own experiences of love and the frustrations, the vulnerabilities, the difficult times, or there's a lot of misogyny actually on that show of Indian Matchmaking. So our experiences of misogyny were in that diary, right? So we realized that actually this also requires a lot of care towards each other as well as towards yourself as a researcher. So that's how we wrote our other piece on feminist collaborative autoethnography, because something we learned is that care is collaborative and care is also towards the community, but not just the community in the sense of us and whom we were researching, but also our readers and what kind of story we owe them.
That's very, very, very fascinating, actually. Any researchers listening to this, I think you can try this method and, sort of build a good relationship with your collaborator as well. I think it's also important to nurture something very important, very productive and very, like trustworthy kind of a relationship. And that's amazing, actually, to do that. So collaborative work is something I feel like brings out the best in you, I feel, right now, right?
Absolutely. I think also, neoliberal academia is all about competition. And I think that it's important for us in such settings to prioritize collaboration where we can. Why can't we rise together?
So when you work, a collaborative work especially, and you plan on a paper, how do you structure it? How do you divide the work? I mean, you gave me this example, which was a little more personal and, diary and all of that. But normally, if it's something more, like qualitative, but something not so self-reflexive, how would you structure that process?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. It happens so organically that I feel you don't even think about it anymore. So now I'm thinking about it. Usually, in my case, what I've had is that there's one person who comes up with the idea and then they bring it to you, and then through discussions, we build it together, right? And then at that point, usually once we know what we're doing, we have a sense of who's going to lead the project. And that doesn't mean that the other person just comes along for the ride, right? But it's pilot, co-pilot, let's say. So everybody's doing the work, but there is a pilot who's had a vision, perhaps, right? And then they're driving that vision forward. I think that's how, that's how Carly and I have been working, Scott and I have been working, and with my other collaborators as well. So like with Carly and me, again, you'll see the first one was Pradhan and Drake, and then the next one was Drake and Pradhan, and then the next one is again going to be Pradhan and Drake. So
that's quite a good balance that you're striking there.
Yes.
Nice. I mean, it's very important that you are able to feel comfortable in that collaboration as well, right? But amazing. Have you written anything on? I mean, I know about the romantasy work which is on fiction, right? Have you done any other work on fiction? Because I know you read and you love reading.
Thank you. I do love reading. Only fantasy fiction.
Yeah, especially fantasy fiction.
Yeah. So the other project, and this one's really close to my heart, is one that got published recently on imagined fantastic atmospheres. Right?
Wow.
So the title, part one of the title was Enchanting Our Lives. And then I don't remember the second part. We link it in the description. But I love how organically that happened. So my co-author, Scott Jones, he's at the University of Birmingham. So Scott and I love watching TV and, doing all of these other things. And we were just having a call about a different project, and we decided to just talk about what we were watching. And then I told him how I was watching, I'd just seen Dune, the first Dune movie, and I was obsessed, right? I read the books and I was obsessed, and I just still couldn't get enough. And I never wanted to leave the world of Dune. So what I used to do was, when I would go grocery shopping, for example, I would have the Dune music playing in my earphones. But I was imagining myself walking through the world of Arrakis, right? The world of Dune. And amazingly enough, it turned out that Scott, in a completely different country, was having a very similar experience with this video game that he loved to play, Zelda Breath of Wild, I think. I don't know. You can hate in the comments. Yeah, so we realized that we were having these experiences. And again, this is not something that you would find out through interviews, right? So once again, we were like, okay, we need to we need to write about this. Something that we're both experiencing. We love the atmospheres of these fantasy worlds, and we wanted to be in those atmospheres. So we conceptualize this idea of imagined fantastic atmospheres. And the idea is that, consumers take a fantasy story world and they reimagine it in exciting ways through this process of poiesis, right? So the idea is to take something and make something more from it. So media consumption is not passive. Not all the time, at least. It takes on a new shape, a playful shape in the imagination. And the best part was, so we wanted to know who else is going through this. And there are so many people on Reddit who are talking about the same thing. So we also did ethnographic observations for that paper. And that was just such a joy to work on.
Wow. Shared fantasies, I guess, right? A lot of shared fantasies that really makes these amazingly marvelous worlds created on screen something real, very, very real and concrete. Yes. This was just beautiful. I loved talking to you, and I'm sure all of you got a glimpse of the kind of work that Dr. Pradhan is right now doing. This is nothing. There's a lot more, but because we don't have so much time, we are winding up the session. Thank you so much, Dr. Anuja. And we are going to share the links to her work here, and you will be able to go and access them and read them. And I'm sure you'll find a lot of interesting insights that will help you in your journey as a researcher. And welcome to SCRMCI.
Thank you for that, Swapna. Before we end, I think I would just like to say one thing. Might be slightly long, but I think it's important we say it. This is my return to Symbiosis.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
I did my bachelor's at Symbiosis. I did my BBA, and now I'm here. And it's a very different Symbiosis, of course, but it's still, Symbiosis, and SCRMCI or SCRMCI, as we call it, has given me such a wonderful space. So I wanted to say thank you to everybody from SCRMCI and also from SIMC for making me feel so welcome and valued. And during my undergraduate study at Symbiosis, I think is when I found my voice. I used to be a very shy kid. And then my bachelor's offered me this space where I could be everyone and do everything. And I had such a great time doing it. And then I'm back here and I feel that SIMC and SCRMCI are now giving me another space to keep that voice going. And I really appreciate it. So thank you so much for that.
Again, very poignant. And Return of the Native.
Yes.
So thank you so much. Thank you for listening. Please do check out the links, read them and share your comments. Come to us, reach out to SCRMCI and to Dr. Anuja. We are always there to help you. Thank you.